Through more than 2 decades at Kenner and Hasbro, Aaron built worlds, told stories, and designed toys for some of pop culture's biggest names, including Transformers, Batman, Star Wars, and more. Join him as he explores the archives and tells you the stories of the creative process behind your favorite toys. This is the Toy Armada with your host, Aaron Archer.
So we are back for yet again another Toy Armada with Aaron Archer, and I'm your host, Protoman. And we are going to be diving a little bit now into the mid to late 90s with a little bit of DC action. A little obscure toy line that ended up doing a lot of firsts in the toy world called Total Justice, or sometimes known as Batman Total Justice, if you read the card back differently. But first, Aaron, how you doing?
I'm great. How you doing, Daniel?
I'm doing super. So Total Justice essentially was a line created in 1996 by Kenner Toys to kind of spread out the DC universe that they had restarted again in 1991. Now, Kenner had famously the DC Superpowers line from 1984 to 1986, covered an entire spectrum of the DC universe. I mean, everything that was pretty much available in the DC universe in the early 80s was done into an action figure form, more or less, through the Superpowers line. But that line did come to an end in 1986. And then, of course, Toy Biz took over in 88 and 89. They did the Batman movie toys that we talked about in a previous segment. They did the DC Superheroes Gold Card Edition, which had Batman, Superman, Aquaman, Robin, Flash, Green Lantern, Hawkman. I could go on and on, Darkseid, Lex. And that was it. That was kind of it in terms of representing the DC universe. When Kenner got it back in 91, Kenner pretty much put a lot of their focus onto Batman and then later Superman. So you had Batman Returns, the Batman Dark Knight collection, the animated series, Legend of Batman, and then, of course, on the Superman side, you had Superman the animated series, the Man of Steel line. There was no DC Universe extension of that. If there was DC characters outside of that, they found their way through the Batman line or the Superman line or something like that. So this was Kenner's first real attempt not only to go to the DC well, pull out those Justice League of America characters and those villains that don't necessarily fall into the Gotham City or the Metropolis kind of environment, and create a full line of that. And also, more than anything, really reflect what comic books were at that moment. And that's something I'm going to want to talk with you when it comes to development, because we have a lot of firsts for a lot of different characters here. And I don't know what the development runtime is, but a lot of stuff lines up really well with a lot of stuff that was going on around that time in the comic book world. Mm-hmm. So lay it on us. How did this all start with Batman Total Justice, as it was originally called?
Yeah, so the working name for, well, we'll get to that in a second. So you hit on it. Kenner was having a lot of success with its segmentation of its DC partnership, and the different Batman segments and then Superman segments were doing well. It was the number one boys property that we were working with at the time within the company, so that's where the money was, so more would be better. So we were always looking for segmentation or expanding of segments. So it was very fondly remembered, the Superpowers toys at Kenner. I mean, when I got to Kenner, that stuff wasn't so far long ago. It was maybe only 9 years prior, which, when I look back now, it's amazing. So the idea of doing the other DC heroes was ripe fruit for a new segment. And it fell to me because it largely was not going to be a feature-based segment. So if you have listened to the other podcast, I'm more of an illustrator, character designer, innovator in that way. I was not a mech tech or feature inventor at that time. So
Spring loaded.
Yeah, I was not spring loaded at the time. So that's why this segment kind of fell to me to develop. So I am 6 months into the job or less, and now I have to develop a segment from scratch using the DC superheroes that we had the rights to at the time. And I needed to define what this was. And we're going to talk a little bit about just what is segmentation through this process. Segmentation is taking something, at least how I, was under it at Kenner, how we developed it this way was there's a large overriding brand that's very successful and has a lot of different ways to come at that brand. Batman, you rightfully so, it was Batman Total Justice. Mm-hmm. We considered it a Batman segment, not its own kind of thing. So the idea of segmentation gives you new audiences, new ways to present your investment into this franchise of Batman, right? Kenner paid money to get it, so let's find all the ways to develop items people might want to get that money back. So there was just this great opportunity. So segmentation, it was going to be the DC heroes, largely not spring-loaded, some other type of less expensive feature to keep these at a price point that was, I think, the lower end at that time, which maybe $5.99 or something.
MSRP was, according to Walmart back then, it was $5.76.
There you go.
And then later on, with inflation at the tail end of the line, according to KB Toys, $7.99. There you go.
Okay. So when I started, the first couple years in 95, 96, that threshold of keeping it under $6 or $7 or even $5 if you could was still a reality in the toy aisle. We're not talking collectors. We're not talking people buying army building. We're not, you're not making chase figures yet. So it was kind of a different landscape that way. So where do I want to go from here?
Well, one thing you mentioned, characters that were available to you.
Yeah.
Because one thing that I find very fascinating about this line is the choice of characters. And what I mean, because people go like, well, I mean, it's Flash, it's Robin, it's Green Lantern. What's surprising about it, it's the extra layer in that it's not, up to this point, who was Robin to the mainstream audience? It was Dick Grayson.
Yeah.
And every Robin figure we have ever gotten up to that point, whether it be all the way back to Mego, or it has to be, the Toy Biz stuff, or even that of Superpowers, it was always Dick Grayson.
Yep.
But Dick Grayson at that moment, going into the 90s, was not Robin anymore. He wasn't Robin for quite a while. We had went through a Jason Todd period, and then we ended up with Tim Drake. And even though we were getting all these Robin figures that were still Dick Grayson, now we're in this new era. And the Flash isn't, he isn't Barry Allen anymore in the 90s. And,
that's right.
And it's not Hal Jordan who's Green Lantern.
It's not Oliver Queen.
And that's later on in Total Justice, which is fast. It's Total Justice. What I love about it is it was a update that up to that point, every single action figure, literally up until only a couple of years ago, were still presenting those characters as their 70s and 80s counterparts. It's like we were stuck there.
Yeah, that's an echo in my career. I kind of have this weird bubble, and some people want to go back to before the bubble, whether it's the G1 with the Armada people or the first DC versus this era of DC. That was somewhat tactical, I guess. DC was very much wanting to promote the modern characters. I do remember having a discussion because I, just automatically, I think, put Barry Allen in there. And they're like, well, it's not Barry Allen.
Oh, it hasn't been Barry since 1983.
It would be Wally West or, whoever the name was at the time.
Yeah, Wally West, you're correct. I'm a big Flash guy, just to let you know.
Okay. And I was like, okay. And then they're like, and Kyle Rayner, and so it was like very clear to everyone, like that. Let's go in that direction. There was no need to go backwards. We were very much in the 90s. DC Comics was still a relevant publishing empire, creating new dynamic content all the time. The Green Lantern series, where Hal Jordan becomes Parallax by Darryl Banks, was a big deal.
Oh, we got that. We're going to get into that too, because you guys cover all of that. Yeah,
all that kind of stuff. So that comes a little later than the initial development. Internally, I had to kind of start drawing up what the vision of this segment could be. First you have to sell it internally before you can even present it to DC.
So then let's separate from the character choices. How do you, instead of it being gimmick-based, spring-loaded, light-up feature, how do you guys then settle on this idea, okay, it's going to be armor?
Well, I would say it wasn't the armor, it was the muscle style of the sculpting. I look at Total Justice as a sculpted line, probably closer to something McFarlane would have done in sculpting detail than Hasbro traditionally had done.
Yeah, it's very pose-based, this one.
Yeah, it's very sinewy. It's very 90s in that regard. If you think of the art of Stephen Platt or, You
mentioned someone from Star Wars that also kind of did that too with the 2-packs. You mentioned an older individual that you used to work with. Forget his name. He did like the posed Star Wars characters.
Yeah. So,
anyways, continue.
So, I had to come up with a style that would pop from the shelf. So initially I started drawing things in a very Batman and Robin or Batman Forever kind of pose structure, very up and down and kind of classic Kenner, 5 points of articulation, and had a good friend, Wayne Losey, come to me, he did Stickfas and Zevos and a bunch of other great toys, and he said, well, you can't just do what's come before. You got to do something, unique. And that's when I stayed up late one night working at Kenner and redrew the Flash board with all that musculature structure and then an overlay of what the armor could be. And that, because that's a story gimmick that gives the sales force something to talk about. But the visual stuff was the characters and that style to stand apart from the other segments. Because we didn't need another 5-point straight up and down segment. We already had animated. We already had the movie stuff. So tactically, you're making decisions to make that segment separate itself from other things. And sometimes you got to make bold decisions to do that. And someday we'll talk about Batman Beyond First Wave as an example of bad ways to do that. But for Total Justice, I hit upon that board. A couple of us tackled the different characters. I did the majority of them, and then it was my responsibility to kind of sell it into DC. And at the time, the working name for it was called Extreme Justice.
That's super 90s in itself.
It's so. And I honestly can't recall why that didn't last. And Total Justice was just the next kind of word to put in there. You know what I mean? That was a Justice League type word. Well, because we couldn't use the term Justice League for some reason.
To be fair, around that time, you had G.I. Joe Extreme.
Oh, yeah. You had a TV show called Extreme.
You had Extreme Ghostbusters, also Kenner.
Yeah.
So I think it might have been a little too extreme.
Yeah. Everything in the 90s was extreme.
Transformers Extreme was on its way, too.
Before everything was unleashed, it was extreme.
Yeah, it's true. Oh, God. Yeah.
So, presented it in. Initially we had looked at some other aspects of the line, but it was pretty soon after that it was just going to be an action figure line. But we had developed the idea of a play set that had the fractal
armor.
Yeah, we had this gimmick that it was spring-loaded squares that when unleashed, they'd kind of topple open and it would look like the thing was multiplying, kind of fractally.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it was really cool visually, but it wasn't a toy, you know. It wasn't.
Yeah.
It was a gimmick by far, and you know, Kenner did not do gimmicks like that at that time. So we never really got any further than that in the playsets and stuff. So when we presented it to DC, they were definitely eager to do it. This is a time before the JLA book came back out.
Well, that was something I actually wanted to establish, because also kind of to give people a bit of a perspective, like this is being developed when? You'd say like late 94, early 95?
Yeah, mid 95, early 95.
So around that time, just to give people perspective, like we're coming off of the Batman Forever movie. So Batman as a brand from a mainstream standpoint is at a high, because Batman Forever was very successful in the box office. It was a lower age group, so a lot of people were able to watch and get into that. Batman animated series is still flying high. It's still doing well on the WB. The Superman series had just come out at that point, was also doing pretty well. Same thing with the toy line. So from the mainstream standpoint, which is cartoons and television and movies, DC was doing very well. And at least my perspective is I think that they probably now wanted to flower out to those other heroes.
Yeah, they were still in the era of, you know, Justice International and like Guy Gardner and Martian Manhunter and Blue Beetle and like a whole different cast of characters, not the traditional old school Justice League. Mm-hmm. They hadn't done that for a long time. So when we were doing our toy line, more in the version of the old time, but with the 90s characters versions, that must have triggered them to look back into bringing the Big Five back together. I don't know. I don't think the dog was wagged by the tail exactly, but it was time to get back to those big characters for sure. So it all happened to work out. So the year that Total Justice came out, just as an aside, I went to the Wizard billiard party at Comic-Con and got to meet the artist, Howard something, who was doing the JLA book when it came back out, which was kind of cool. The toy guys at Toy Fair introduced me to him because they thought it was funny that we should meet.
No, that's awesome. And when you say the Wizard billiard party, you mean Wizard Con or Wizard the magazine?
Wizard the magazine had a invite party every year at this pool hall.
For people who don't know, back in the 90s, Wizard magazine was a very important comic book publication magazine that kind of kept everyone up to date on what was going on in the world. And then they would go on to spin off Toy Fair magazine, which is actually we're going to talk about Toy Fair later in relation to Total Justice.
Those parties were epic. Those good times.
I could only imagine. I wish I could be at those. Those would have been really cool. So, like, getting back to what, like, when we look at, like, the choices, right? So, was this a DC push? Hey, since we're trying to get the rest of the world to know about our other characters that aren't Batman and Superman, is it them going, we want to get back the old band together, but it's got to be Kyle instead of Hal. It's got to be Wally instead of Barry, because that's what the comics are right now.
Yeah, they gave us the they wanted us to use the modern versions at that time. So like I said, I remember wanting to do Oliver Queen, and they're like, no, you got to do this other guy,
Connor Hawke.
And like I said, I had Barry Allen in the first board, and that got changed. And Superman needed to have the long hair because he had long hair. We're going to
bring that up too. Yeah, that's all in the notes here. There's a lot of that.
Yeah, so we needed villains that were significant after Darkseid. There's not really, it's hard to do universal villains for the JLA.
You need your Thanos kind of.
Yeah, so
character.
That's how we ended up with Parallax, which was big in the 90s. That was a major villain in turn on the Hal Jordan character. So that is my favorite toy in the line, by far.
Does look nice.
The cape on that is sweet, and that is a sculpted cape. You should have seen the thin piece of wax that thing was.
Total teamwork, total tech, total justice. Now Batman joins forces with heroes like the Flash and Green Lantern. powered by new fractal tech gear to make their superpowers grow stronger than ever. So when the massive Darkseid tightens his evil grip, this breakthrough body armor strengthens Green Lantern with an extra blast of blazing firepower, whips the Flash beyond the speed of light, and gives Batman the power to face Earth's darkest hour. Now, justice is stronger than ever. Total teamwork, total tech, total justice. Figures each own separately.
So just to kind of go through just quickly like wave one before we move on. So like, again, you had the traditional Batman, the vanilla Batman, which already most kids would have bought it just because it's a vanilla Batman on its own. Came with his flight armor and glider cape. With the armor and everything like that. But at the end of the day, it was the Batman figure. It was the face of the line. When we move on to the Robin, Robin came with his spinning razor disc and battle staff. This is a Tim Drake Robin. And not only is it a Tim Drake Robin, but it is the very first Tim Drake action figure ever. Up to that point, like I said, everything had been Dick Grayson. There had never been a Tim Drake up to that point. When we move on to Flash, again, still in Wave 1, we have the Velocity Power Suit that you gave him here. This is the very first time ever we see a Wally West action figure. So he makes his debut there in his action figure form. These are all like the rookie cards for you listeners.
They really are.
Yeah, they are. Well, that's in the action figure speculative world. You look for the rookie cards. This whole line.
This whole line is rookie cards.
We're going to go into it with the other waves too.
Let's get to Aquaman then.
Oh yeah, well, I'll get into Aquaman in a moment. Yeah. So with Green Lantern, we have the Energy Ring disc launcher. Again, Kyle Rayner. It's his first ever action figure ever. Up to that point, we had a Hal Jordan with the Toy Biz line before that, and even before that with Superpowers, but there never had been a Kyle toy. Getting into our big villain of this wave, every wave has one big villain. The villain in this wave was Darkseid, not his first action figure in this case. He's had a few before that. He comes with the Omega Effect Capture Claw. I remember having this one as a kid. What a weird figure. Big, beefy, kind of heavy figure, though. Yeah. It's very heavy. I wonder how that affected the, like the budget for like the assortment. I don't know.
Yeah,
probably seen. And then the last one that you have here, you have Aquaman with his blasting hydro spear. Now, what's fascinating about this one, more than the others, is that in 1994, Aquaman had a new miniseries, and in issue number 2, Arthur, a.k.a. Aquaman, lost his powers, and he had his hand in a pool of piranhas. Piranhas ate his hand off, pretty much. And he lost his hand. And then, I think it was 2 issues later, he fought Lobo, and then Lobo, ripped off his traditional orange shirt that he normally wears, his little fin shirt. And that gave birth to this shirtless, hook hand Aquaman figure with the beard that we know today that kind of lost himself in the comics. And this was in late 94. Mm-hmm. And this one here represents that modern 90s Aquaman without the orange shirt, with the hook hand, with the beard. And again, something that is a strong representation of what that character was at the time in the comic books, where would it have normally been, which was just Toy Biz a couple years ago, orange suit, still has both his hands intact, speaking to the fishes, so a very different take, but something that represented what was going on at the time in the comic books. And what's all... Yeah. Oh, sorry, go.
That was probably a selling point. Hey, this is the first time we're doing this one, and the first time we're going to do this guy, and this is what's in the comics right now, and this is what people are supporting with their reading. And
4 out of the 6 figures out of that wave, of that launch wave, were first times for those characters, which in itself, like you said, is a very big selling point. If you were a avid reader of DC comic books, this was your first Wally West, your first Tim Drake, your first Kyle Green Lantern, and your first hook hand Aquaman. Yep. Where, sure, you probably had a really good Batman before, you had a Darkseid figure maybe from before, but literally a good chunk of the line you had to get those firsts. So it was a very interesting twist too to have that.
Yeah.
And also just to mention too, the I guess the copyright or the storyline, according to the packaging, was on a distant planet, an evil being known as Darkseid prepares for his invasion and the destruction of Earth. Batman learns of this diabolical plan and recruits the world's mightiest superheroes. Almost sounds like the Avengers there. for an all-out assault on Darkseid's forces, and that's kind of how it's being sold to the customer. That it's Batman assembled the Justice League, essentially a kind of version of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, very very interesting. Just that first wave, just because of those choices, and that would, and like we said, this is going to be a continuing thing as we go into the other waves also.
So I did the Flash, the Aquaman, the Darkseid. Those were my toys to finish and complete. The whole line was my responsibility to drive through the system, keep everybody up to date on what we were trying to do, be the point person for the presentations. That's kind of what the job, your role was in that kind of situation. So Mike Brand, who I've talked about, who did that first wave of Star Wars figures and Legends of Batman, largely, he did the Batman figure. If you notice, it's got that hand that's kind of out with the bent fingers. That's a very Mike Brand pose. There's some other figures that he did with that kind of pose.
Messing with that figure, I was like, how do you pose this?
Yeah, there's like one pose.
Do you have it aiming down, or do you have it like forward and he's like grabbing something? Like it's such a weird pose.
Steve Bono did Green Lantern, and I don't remember if he also did Robin or not.
Someone did the Tim Drake.
Yeah. So, yeah. So I've posted the Darkseid sculpt input online. There was a change. At one point he had the tunic, and then for some reason he got changed to like the wrestler tights.
Well, yeah, the last Darkseid figure that existed up to that point was the Toy Biz one, and he had kind of like the cape tunic kind of look. I guess maybe that was probably, again, a conscious effort by maybe either Kenner themselves or DC to go, well, this is what we did before. Like, just
I was
not
the one
too
making
long
those
ago.
calls, so I don't know why it got changed late. I don't know, because the sculpt
Maybe they
input,
just saw what was being sold at one point, and they're just like, let's just do something different.
Yeah.
Also, I want to just note too. So we also have the case breakdown. This is another fascinating thing. So here's how the case breakdown worked. It was, you got 3 Batmans, 2 Robins, 2 Flash, 2 Green Lanterns, 2 Darkseids. So there was 3 Batmans. Who was the one per case? Aquaman was 1 per case. So if you're an individual that wants to know who's the rare one of the bunch, apparently Aquaman was only 1 per case. Why they made him 1 per case, I don't know. Maybe because they perceived him maybe as the least popular of the bunch. But that's what they did there. Just an interesting fun fact there from the case breakdown.
There's the 2 different color hooks. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, there's a variant, yeah. Well, there's tons of variants. Oh, I have a huge list of variants, too.
Well, the hook is the only one I intended to be a variant.
Okay. Oh, you intended for that? Okay.
Oh, yeah, we spec'd out a certain number of production to have a running change, essentially.
Interesting. Maybe that's probably was 1 per case. That might be the reason.
Well, that would have had no bearing on marketing.
Okay.
This was early days of this, and I remember emailing the engineers in Hong Kong saying, hey, we're going to have a running change, blah, 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 because that was our tactic. But at the time, it was still an engineering-led company, and the idea that some designer was just going to go change production after we had our sign-offs and photographs on the card and everything. Like, what are you guys doing? It was a very jarring thing to ask for at the time. Now it is very commonplace, right? Running changes, multiple decos on the same figure and the same runs. Maybe a different head shows up on some McFarlane figures, But back then, that was very tricky manufacturing to navigate.
Now, when you're pretty much bringing this to market, right, and you have the final product, DC liked what they saw?
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
Awesome. Do you want to jump into Wave 2, or is there anything else you want to cover, essentially, with this opening wave?
No, I just want to highlight the sculptor, Mike Burling. He was the one who brought this style to bear, even more so than my drawing. And there is a G.I. Joe Extreme figure. I think the character's name is Harpoon. He's kind of got a blue vest.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the character. I'm just trying to see where you're getting with it.
That was the we used that $1 to be
really?
to be the Flash.
Well, a lot of the...
So if you look at the arms on that character, they look a lot like the Flash's arms.
Yeah, well, a lot of the G.I. Joe Extreme figures kind of have that kind of aesthetic to begin with.
And that's that is partially that sculptor. Well, at the time, that whole sculpting department kind of had that vibe. But Mike Burling did the Total Justice figures.
Would you say that was kind of the direction that the action figure industry was going because of McFarlane's influence and stuff, or?
No, what I like to say about McFarlane's influence is there is a rainbow of toy types and needs. Some are very plain, some are ornate, some have features, some are just great sculptures. He did really well in promoting the idea that you could do great sculpting in toys. So I think that elevated the game of sculpting in all toys. Even McDonald's toys got better sculpting, right?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of great '90s McDonald's toys.
So I don't know. I'm not going to debate his influence at the time, but it was a unique influence that was taken and then run with. We never looked back. I can tell you right now, no one at Kenner was ever looking at what McFarlane was doing to make decisions. He was not making any money. He was not very reliable. The toys fell apart. All we heard was negativity.
Yeah, the first wave of Spawn figures did have a lot of QC issues.
All we heard was negativity. So it was not somebody that was worth, for a major company to be looking at, other than he's getting into a new territory with the sculpting. Maybe we could step up our game too, and that was smart to do. That's how I look at McFarlane's influence, at least at Kenner Hasbro. So, again, I look at the comics of the 90s, which McFarlane was a big part of, that overall influenced that very detailed aesthetic and a lot of little musculature stuff. That's just what was happening in that era.
Oh, completely. Well, not just Todd, but also what Jim Lee was doing.
Yeah. That's what I mean by
that whole image crew in general. Yeah.
Yeah. That. So we were very much in tune with what was just happening in comics at the time, and the aesthetic that sculpting was getting to at the time. Again, we're not that far off from the same people who sculpted this stuff sculpted VR Troopers and Robin Hood and some of that stuff. So the game definitely got stepped up in a short couple of years.
And those ones that you just mentioned were very cardboard cutout 5 points of articulation.
Yeah,
VR Trooper, Robin Hood, even more so. Look, aesthetically was something that almost belonged with the Star Wars of the 70s.
Yeah, look at Waterworld. Waterworld fits in with Star Wars.
Oh God, yeah. There's like no paint on those toys. It's insane.
That's weird too. Yeah. And what I'll say is, again, I don't want to give McFarlane credit for you got to step up your sculpting game, but it was like before that, kids were accepting of the level that Ghostbusters and Star Wars and even G.I. Joe were, which was kind of a subtle relief, not too many deep cuts, kind of sculpting style. I joke that it looks like it's sculpted out of butter by today's standards. But as McFarlane brought more of that into it and more detail, and the style of the 90s and all visual treatments was more detailed, every company went more detailed.
Anything else you want to cover before we jump into Wave 2?
No. This line so far has happened pretty straightforward. I was fortunate that it all came together as easy as it was to sell it in and have the company be behind it. It wasn't as tricky as other segment launches will go.
Total teamwork, total tech, total justice. Led by Batman armed with fractal tech gear, these heroes are stronger than ever. Superman's kryptonite ray makes evil pay. Hawkman's talons take hold of terror. Evil Despero is doomed. New Total Justice, figures sold separately.
So into the second half of 1996, we get Wave 2 of Batman Total Justice, and we end up with here the Fractal Armor Batman. Now, before I move forward, what is Fractal Armor according to Aaron Archer?
All right. So, again, segmentation. You want to sell a toy, a character, but you got to give that character a scenario by which you can kind of story tell. If nothing else, to have a thing to talk about on the commercial. The Flash is going against Darkseid, hopefully with the fractal armor, ... It can't just be, Flash fights Darkseid, just like in the comic books. Go get a toy. That's not a call to action in the same way that you need it to be. So the fractal armor is kind of the active storytelling device that brings these characters together, that become this armor for the toys that is easily left off if you don't need that, and you can just have nice, clean toys. But the armor gave the commercial aspect and the salesmanship aspect of the brand. You can't just say, hey, it's a new Robin. It's the first time we've done this Green Lantern. It's the first time we've done this character. That's not enough.
Yeah.
So to me, it's just the toy gimmick that, it's the cost of doing business.
Next one we got here is Superman with his kryptonite ray emitter, which I find fascinating that Superman has a kryptonite shooting weapon. This is the first time we have a Superman toy with the long hair that he was starting to sport in the 90s. So again, there's another first right there. And then, of course, we have Hawkman with the massive grip talons. Again, nothing special with that Hawkman. It's just another Hawkman figure. And here's a first, and it's the villain of this wave. We got Despero with his galactic body blow attack, which is obviously going to be more of a gimmick in this case, something like that. And this is the first time Despero gets a figure, despite the fact that this character has been around since the 60s.
Yep.
So at least that's another big first for that one. Anything about these Wave 2 guys that you want to mention?
So, it's a Batman segment, so Batman was going to be in probably every wave we would have done or would have tried. I think it's a funny Batman because he's technically in a black outfit. He's kind of more in the movie outfit.
Yeah, first one is in the traditional blue. Now this one almost looks like the Keaton Batman with the yellow emblem and everything, but then with the armor kind of.
Yeah, unfortunately the sculpted armor was on there, but I still like that Batman. I think it's pretty cool. Ham Woodhouse did the Hawkman.
Okay.
I did Despero, which I didn't know the character very well at the time, and there really wasn't a lot of good content easily found on him.
he was.
Again, this is pre-internet for me.
I think their
stuff.
logic was they wanted big guys.
Yeah,
for
we wanted
villains.
Yeah.
And they probably went through their archive and went, "Who could we use?" And again,
when you say they, it's me.
Oh, was it? Oh, okay.
You need to come up with a villain worthy. Okay.
So did they give you like a DC Bible or something? And
we had a full archive of the Who's Who, and we got the full box of monthly subscription books from DC.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah, I read everything DC had for
free books. Nice.
5 years. Yeah, free books, everything they printed, Paradox Press, all of it. All the trades, I got all the. It's crazy. Anyway.
Yeah.
I had them back in the day. Anyway,
Hasbro. I'm jealous a little bit.
Hasbro had them, not me. But so yeah, we had access to look at whatever we could. We definitely had a great relationship with DC licensing in New York that worked right in the DC office with the artists and editors. So if we ever really needed to get better reference or an idea, we could rely on them somewhat to, get Denny O'Neil on the phone and have a discussion, or Paul Levitz. No, Paul. Yeah, was it?
You're talking Batman books?
Yeah, like big editor of the books. Yeah. Paul.
At the time, Tom Lyle was doing a lot of the early '90s stuff.
No, I'm talking overall editor.
Oh, that I don't know. No.
Yeah, Paul something. He's the creator of Huntress. So we'd talk to those guys, and get input. The editors of the book, a guy named Jordan Gorfinkel at the time, he was a good resource. Working it through, like who could be cool, color variety, all that kind of stuff that you're also trying to balance.
Anything else before we go into Wave 3?
I don't think so.
So now at Wave 3, we have our first female character that's introduced to the line. And again, also a first. Now, the character of Huntress has been around since the 70s, before the Crisis rebirth of DC at the time. She was Helena Wayne. She was the daughter of Batman and Catwoman. After Crisis, the character was rebooted and reinvented into a standalone character, still part of the Bat family of comic books, but still its own kind of character in Helena Bertinelli. And this is the first ever Huntress figure of any Huntress ever, and it makes its debut here. And this is the Huntress figure with barbed arrow crossbow, so also you managed to work a gimmick in that is reflective of her weapon in the comic books, because she's known for her crossbow kind of weapon. Mm-hmm. So pretty cool too. And again, first female of the line, which was that a decision? You wanted to have a female finally in the line, or was that a DC call? Did they say, hey, we need to have, and why not Wonder Woman, which would have probably been the obvious, let's say?
I can't recall how the Huntress came into be, other than we definitely were the Batman team and considered this a Batman segment. So we were probably...
so that makes more sense, yeah.
Probably looking at it that way.
And you didn't want to do Batgirl.
Yeah. We didn't want to do Batgirl. She was never fighting Darkseid, right?
Yeah.
At least at the time. So, Wonder Woman, since you asked, here was still under contract with Mattel. They bought the rights to all toy product from DC for the Wonder Woman family. Largely for Barbie, and largely as a defensive position against other companies bringing a character like Wonder Woman in the market that might
be a girl segment.
Yeah, might have some traction. So, humbly, we used to say that Mattel was cock-blocking Wonder Woman for the sake of Barbie. So that's why I did not have access to Wonder Woman during the mainline run of Total Justice.
Would you have used her instead of Helena if the?
Oh yeah, we had boards of her.
Okay,
she was Wave 1.
So Huntress really was kind of a second choice. Okay.
Yeah. Now the question you asked, what I can't recall is, were we desperate to put a female in the line at the time, or was that just, the right kind of cool figure, the right color, the right situation? I can't recall that.
Well, I'm glad that you did, because I love Huntress. He's one of my favorite DC characters. And I love that figure. That's a fantastic figure.
I say this humbly. I'll put that female figure on a 5-point scale of articulation against any female figure.
Yeah.
There's a handful of really nice 5-inch figures, and she's really got a great pose, good sculpts. Mike Burling did that one. I think it looks great.
And again,
I'm very proud of that figure.
It has the weapon from the comics, so even the gimmick kind of stuff, if you put it aside, it's a really good looking representation of what Huntress was, especially in the Tom Lyle books and the Robin books at the time, where she that was kind of more where she was mostly seen.
Yeah, if you bring me a Huntress figure at a convention to sign, I will be I'm always very happy when I see that one, because
that's a really good one.
Yeah.
Next one we got Black Lightning. This is the Jefferson Pierce version, because there was different Black Lightnings throughout the years. Again, very first time Black Lightning ever gets a figure. This is a character that, from the African American community side of things, was one of the big black male characters within the DC universe. DC usually has had that problem where it's like, well, who's our Afrocentric character? Mm-hmm. And you even saw that when they did the Justice League movie, they had to pull Cyborg, which has traditionally been a Teen Titans character, a Titans character.
Yeah.
And then even when they did the Justice League cartoon series, they went with the Green Lantern of John, who was John Stewart, who was the Black Green Lantern, instead of going with Hal Jordan or Kyle. So I guess in the same way too, you have the female character. Now we got to bring in also the Afrocentric character. Black Lightning. How did you guys fall on Black Lightning? And again, his first action figure.
We were really trying to do what they did in the 80s. There's a wide selection of heroes in the Superpowers line.
Yeah, with the diversity of it. Yeah.
So I don't know that we were advocating for a African American character, as much as variety and interesting stuff. Tony Isabella, the writer who created the character, is from Northern Ohio. I've met him many times at shows. Eddie Newell, who did the comic in the 90s that my costume's based on, is also from Northern Ohio. Two guys that I kind of knew from my time of going to conventions and respecting what they were doing. So when I got the opportunity to pick, I kind of picked that character out of respect. Because it was your buddies. Out of respect for these guys that I respected, yeah. And I think that's a great representation of the character too.
Yep.
He's got that cool collar cape thing, and I just like that sculpt. Yeah.
And then we mentioned him before, we got Green Arrow with the multi-action mega longbow, but this isn't Oliver Queen. And again, this is another example of really like how recent and current these figures are. So Oliver Queen had a son, and he debuted in a comic book just a year and a half prior to these action figures coming out in Green Arrow Volume 2, issue number 0 in late 1994. And that is Connor Hawke, the current Green Arrow that we have here, we're looking at today, this figure. So again, this is you going through the DC current Bibles and stuff like that and making the decision to go with this one as opposed to the one that we've all known for the past up to this point 30 years, you know.
My memory's a little hazy, but my name is Aaron Archer. I think I pitched Oliver Queen for the first wave.
Interesting.
And because I had a whole rendered board with Oliver Queen. And that's when they said, well, we're working on this other character, and you got to use that one. And that's when it shifted to some other character. So
well, that's why this one's the most interesting, because this design literally debuted probably at the exact same time you guys were working.
Yeah, on it. So I think that was a bit of the whole synergy thing, and that's why it got pushed a little bit, because they probably weren't ready. So yeah. That was, and whatever. I mean, DC often guided us on what was popular or happening, so that we could make informed decisions. They really weren't in a position to push us to use any particular character if we didn't, need it. But if we were asking questions or looking for information, they were definitely there to help sell us on these characters. Sure. So that's where they were like, we're going to do this new character, let's do that one, and and so we're like, yep, sure. And he probably got bounced to the third wave just out of our timing.
Yeah. And the last one we have here is kind of the same thing also, because in March of 1994, Green Lantern Volume 3, issue number 50 was the debut of Hal Jordan going dark and becoming Parallax. And that was in 94, and then lo and behold, who's our villain of this wave? We have the Emerald Twilight, which was also the name of the miniseries that it happened in the comics, but the Emerald Twilight Parallax with Warp Field Energy Blaster. So let me know about this guy, because this one looks fantastic.
Yeah, I think this is one of my top 5 action figures that I was a part of. He just got a great pose. That cape is amazing. He's got that maniacal look that was big in the comic at the time. This guy was designed by Darryl Banks, who was the artist of the book at the time and did the whole run of Kyle and Parallax and all that. And he's another guy I know from shows and back in the day, and he lives in Columbus, Ohio, so only 2 hours away. So I was just excited to do another representation of a character from an artist that I had some connection with. So that's why I probably wanted to do that one well. So that's kind of what I remember. Mike Burling did that sculpt, and I think he's as proud of it today as anybody.
And again, like this entire wave, this wave of 4 figures, every single one of these characters, the first time they ever had an action figure. So there was this overall theme across Total Justice of newness. These new characters, these new representations of these characters, never been done in any kind of action figure form. So it's very interesting how that kind of rolls out. And then the last one that we have here with Total Justice, before we go into more of the spin-off kind of stuff, you guys also had a Toy Fair exclusive. You had the Flash figure, but without the armor, repainted into Reverse Flash.
That's right.
And it was I believe it was 1996, February was when you could order him. Magazine promo exclusive Reverse Flash. Again, the first time we get this action figure, which is, again, a common theme with this line. How did you guys work that out? Was that something that just you guys talk with Toy Fair every so often and they want to work out some kind of repaint? Or that was a common thing with Toy Fair magazine. Back in the day, for people that aren't aware, there was this very popular magazine called Toy Fair, and they would have magazine exclusives that you could mail away for. It wasn't just DC. It could be a Star Wars figure. It could be Firestorm. It could be anything. It could be all kinds of different stuff that they would work out with other toy companies just to kind of have a little extra something. Hey, if you buy our magazine and pull out this insert, you could order a special figure.
Yep. I think the way that process worked, I'm pretty sure, was that they would buy a certain amount of figures and they would put them in those white boxes to ship them out to people. So
they come in a plain white box.
They were often looking for either items that were tooled up and not released, which was a lot of the Toy Biz stuff they did, and or you could easily redeco into a character that might not make it to a main line but would be suitable for the audience that they had, which was kind of a more niche audience that would appreciate something like a Reverse Flash. So
it's a repaint that also doesn't require a lot of imagination.
Exactly. So we didn't have to change any of the books or plates, which is the painting techniques you use to paint toys. They could just mold it in yellow. Instead of painting red, you paint yellow. Instead of painting yellow, you paint red, and you're done.
Yeah, it was very easy.
So easy to communicate that to the Hong Kong part of the effort too. So that's probably how that character got chosen. We had extra tooling, and it became a legitimate DC character by changing the deco versus some kind of half-assed version.
Now, he doesn't have the armor, so how does that work from a production standpoint? Like, was the armor separate kind of tooling?
The armor would have been always a separate tool.
Okay. Because it's I'm just imagining like it's all on the same mold, and they're just throwing out all this plastic.
So action figure tooling is slightly a different monster than what you and I talk about often with the Transformer tooling.
Yeah, Transformer tooling is a whole other animal.
Yeah, so the action figure, five points of articulation, heads, the arms, the legs, the torsos, are usually molded in the same color. The torso is molded in a different material. So there's usually two molds there for the arms, heads, legs, and then the torso is a separate mold. And then there's separate molds for things like the launcher, the triggers, any of that kind of thing. So action figures, you're usually able to pull the figure out if you need to.
And what he's trying to say too is because usually, especially back then in the 90s, a torso would usually be made out of ABS plastic, and limbs, sometimes the head, would be usually made out of PVC. Reasons for that, I'm going to take a guess. Breakage, probably.
Yeah, ABS is a resilient plastic that's not going to crack under stress of torquing on PVC arms and legs.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
With or without a screw in the back of it. Because now what they do is they sonic weld those halves together. So you don't need a screw because the plastic is already bonded. But you need ABS for that. PVC, for it's slightly more bendy. It's not going to create a sharp point or any of that. So that's usually why those two materials were chosen. And then things like launchers and projectiles are usually made of polypropylene or high intensity polypropylene.
Now, also in relation to the Total Justice line, because of its success, there was merchandising done on the side. DC did a 3-issue comic book series of Total Justice, kind of simplifying what was the copyright on the back of the packaging and creating a story. It essentially used the first wave of action figures that were included for characters in the comic, along with Blue Beetle, Gypsy, and Parademon also appearing in that 3-issue book. They also did 2 children's books, again, simplifying the kind of story and using the key art and visuals that was found from Wave 1 in those 2 kids' books. There also was this is the interesting one, and this is where I have questions for you. There was a coloring book series also. And what was interesting about those coloring books is it used a lot of characters that were not toys in the line, but possessed those gimmicks. So like the fractal tech gear and everything like that. You had Martian Manhunter, you had Oracle, you had Steel, the John Henry Irons version. You had Superboy, again representing the Superboy that was available in the 90s comics at the time. You had Supergirl, and you had Wonder Woman. And all of them done in that kind of Total Justice style. Those?
I don't know anything about those.
Oh, really? Because see, what's fascinating about it is it was all marketed as Total Justice. I have to track these down then, because I'm wondering where did those.
I mean, I know the 3-issue comics, but I don't know. Yeah.
You know, like if there were style guides, where did those come from then to have those featured? Because there's something we'll cover afterwards.
I think DC had a whole department that would make style guides.
Okay.
And they would make style guides that were, 15 images. And so they may have made a Total Justice style guide.
Well, that's what I want to get in, because afterwards they took some of these designs. I don't know where they originated from. And then there's kind of a pseudo sequel series, which we'll get into. One thing I just want to cover is around that same time also there was a Justice League Task Force video game for the Genesis and the Super Nintendo. It was a fighting game, very simple fighting game, kind of getting on the hype of the fighting game craze at the time that was started with Street Fighter. It actually came out 4 months before the toy line debuted, and it uses more of the legacy characters, so Oliver Green and more of the older designs like Aquaman and stuff like that. So it's not really tied to Total Justice, even though it came out around the same time. Now, the sequel to this series ended after Series 3, but they weren't done with the series, per se. In 1998, Kenner became Hasbro, and then Hasbro took these molds and then created a new line called the Justice League of America. And if you look at the Justice League of America line, which came out in 1998, it uses a lot of these Total Justice molds.
Yes.
Batman, it used Green Arrow, but gave it a different color. Like, if they used some of the molds directly and were 100% the same toy, or they would take the mold and they would give it a slightly tweaked color scheme or make the yellow a little more, mustardy or something like that. And this would go on for four waves and would include, again, some of those style guide things that were showed up in that coloring book. So then all of a sudden, here is Martian Manhunter now, and Steel and Superboy with, fractal tech armor and stuff like that. And again, also much like Total Justice, there was some firsts in that. So it was the first time we got a Blue Beetle figure. It was the first time we got Superman Red and Superman Blue. It was the first Steel figure before we had the movie.
So we missed a wave.
Oh, there was an extra wave.
So the wave that came out that was the Dr. Polaris Blue Beetle, and then the second Green Lantern and second Flash.
Wasn't that part of the Justice League?
Those were mainline items that I did.
Oh, okay. I guess it wasn't part of Total Justice, though, was it?
Well, this was the fourth wave.
Okay.
That never made it.
Oh, you're talking about, something that never came to be. Okay.
Yeah, it came to, so I'll tell the whole story. So
yeah,
we developed the fourth wave, which was Dr. Polaris was the villain, with his little car thing. Blue Beetle, which I was excited to do. We did an armored up Flash, which I'm not sure people have seen. Maybe they have. I don't know if that
No, he does come up later.
Okay, does it? And he came with the Atom?
Yeah, so what happened was a lot of those sculpts and stuff that you're referring to, that I didn't know that it was supposed to be Wave 4.
So yeah, I took those up to paint deco, and then the line got canceled.
Okay.
So those never came out under the Total Justice banner.
Yeah.
What happened at that point, which you're alluding to with this other stuff, it went to the Hasbro QC or direct market team. So they are the team that takes the tools and does all kinds of crazy stuff and makes different lower cost product for different markets across the globe under totally different conditions than I would have had to make my products under.
What you're referring to as Wave 4, because you had in 1998 you had this Justice League of America line, and then in 1999 there was the Hasbro DC Superheroes 2-packs. And in those 2-packs, you had one 2-pack, Blue Beetle, which was the first Blue Beetle action figure with Fractal Armor Flash, and a mini, almost a slug, if you will, Ray Palmer, a.k.a. the Atom.
Yeah.
And then the other 2-pack was Fractal Armor Green Lantern with Dr. Polaris.
Yeah. So Steve Bono did the Green Lantern, and then I did the other 3.
Ah, okay.
Or slash 4 if you count the Atom as a separate
So
guy.
if you are a Total Justice collector and you want to get truly everything, you get everything under the Total Justice banner, and then you jump to 1999's Hasbro DC Superheroes 2-packs, which would be your Wave 4, essentially.
Yeah. So I was really proud of the Blue Beetle and was bummed out that one didn't come out. And I had a lot of fun designing that armored up Flash, too.
So it did come out in the end.
Yeah, and it did. I wasn't
under a different title, though.
Yeah. So I wouldn't have been the designer of note once it was finished, but it was my item, and that happens a lot. That definitely happens a lot. So that is where my Total Justice contribution ends, and then everything else, the Red and Blue Superman and Martian Manhunter, and I did Wonder Woman eventually. That is all that other group using whatever tooling is available within the company, and maybe some original sculpts, maybe not, to cobble up a line.
Yeah, they pretty much put together a line using some of the old molds. They created some new ones. They did some Diamond exclusive stuff. They did a couple of box sets, again, using some of those old molds with some new ones. They did a 12-inch figure line, which I don't know who those were designed by, but they did Aquaman, Flash, Green Lantern, Martian Manhunter, and Superman Blue in that. And they also did in 2001, which is kind of the end of this journey. In 2001, they did the DC Superheroes line, which was the WB store exclusives.
Mm-hmm.
And these took the original molds all the way from Total Justice and did them as singular standalone figures on their own, like Aquaman, Batman, Green Arrow, Hawkman, Robin, and Despero.
I had the original artwork for that package for a long time. I don't know. Kevin Nolan did it. The artist, Kevin Nolan.
For the DC Superheroes one, the WB?
Yeah. Like I had his comp, which was really cool. Yeah. So that's all I...
Now we have some questions. We got some questions here from Thomas Medcalf, who comes from the inside_the Batcave on Instagram. And he's got some questions here, so let's see if we could get them answered about Total Justice. First one he has here is, how close was the line to continuing? And if so, which characters were in the pipeline? Was it one that featured tie-in merchandise like Supergirl or Wonder Woman?
All right, I think we covered most of that. I don't think we ever looked at Supergirl, and I don't know why. There were often rights issues with the DC female characters because of Mattel. They had done a lot of signing up of doll licenses separate along the way, so it was always a little tricky with for that reason. And then there's not too many characters that fell off along the way. We pretty much made versions of everybody we intended to make, so I don't really, and even we were starting to do second versions, right, of Green Lantern and Flash, so I'm not sure where the line would have gone naturally, actually. And
not to mention, making a toy for the kids market of like Lobo, let's say, which was more an MA-17 kind of comic book by DC at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So even some of the more higher beats,
we're going to do Doom Patrol.
Yeah, exactly.
And I definitely didn't want to do Legionnaires or any of those characters, so, that's where it ended.
He also asks here, were there any plans, we kind of answered this a little bit, but were there any plans for vehicles or playsets?
Like I said, we looked at it for a very short time, and when I mean short time, like a week. There was some capture, the base that had the fractal stuff kind of had a capture element to it, but it just wasn't all that exciting. And then I think we looked.
I think in my case, like when you think about how wacky those sculpts were, imagine fitting that Batman into a Batmobile.
Well, that was once you make, these are all calculated design choices that you have to make. So once you
that's
decide,
a wacky Batman.
Yeah, once you decide to make those kind of crazy poses, you've almost decided at that point that you're not going to do a vehicle line.
Well, going back to what you said about Todd McFarlane with that very first wave, when he made those first Spawn toys, he made a Spawnmobile, which does not work with the toys very well, because I think he didn't think about that. If anything, it doesn't fit at all. Like, because you have that very weird kind of Spawn sculpt, and then it's like here's something that's like a traditional Batmobile. Yeah. And he does not fit very well in those things. So it's the same thing here, where it's like you look at that Batman with what you said. What's his name? Brand, who did the sculpt.
Yeah, like that.
With that weird hand. Maybe actually now that I think about it, that hand that he has, maybe that could be holding a steering wheel. I don't know. Maybe he was actually thinking ahead.
And that's why, as an example, if you look at the Legends of Batman Batmobile, which was like the Simon Bisley Judge Dredd Batman kind of Batmobile.
Yeah,
looks like a shark. Because it was part of the Batman, that Batman segment, which had those poses, it's basically a big canopy that opens up and you can throw anything in there.
Yeah.
It's not a driver's seat, it's not a cockpit.
He's just lying down.
Yeah, he just like throw him in there and shut the canopy. He's in the Batmobile. Because that's what happens when you have posed figures.
We also have a question that we kind of answered a little bit. Was the Hasbro Justice League of America line planned as a continuation, or were these sculpts just used as they were? Were there any new Justice League of America sculpts intended to be part of the Total Justice line? We kind of covered that. It was more so the DC Superheroes 2-packs that were the intended.
Those are your legitimate.
Those are the legit ones. Everything else was kind of an afterthought.
Everything else is crass marketing.
Pretty much. Get that red tornado in there somehow. Gotta get that trademark.
Yeah.
Were there any characters you wanted to include that were nixed, and how much say did you get about the lineup? Which you kind of answered.
So I had a lot to say about the lineup to the point where DC was like, let's use the modern characters, and then I had to search for the modern characters. But I don't think there was anybody that I wanted to do. The strangest one that I think back now, when I think of this, is why the heck is Lex Luthor in armor not in the segment?
Yeah, that would have been better instead of Despero.
I can't recall if we were encouraged to not use him. I think that was during the time he was running for president and stuff in the comics.
Also, I think at the same time you had literally at the same time you have the Superman animated toy line and the Man of Steel one.
Yeah,
so maybe too close.
Yeah, they were probably Lex heavy as a result. So I look back and I kind of scratch my head at that one because it seems just so obvious. And
well, not to mention you have a suit in that wave that Despero was in. You had a Superman toy, and he has a kryptonite gimmick. Yeah. So it almost like lends itself to it, if anything.
Yeah.
That would have been.
But no, because it was a struggle. I would have looking back now, it would have been cool to do an interpretation of a parademon or something. Maybe I could have. We were trying to use heavy hitters, even though I did get down to Black Lightning, but I wasn't going to be able to sneak in Apache Chief or, that wasn't
armor that makes him taller.
Yeah. It just was. So there really wasn't too many characters left to do that had to be done. I'm probably more upset about some characters that I didn't get to do in other Batman segments than this one.
And the last question we have here, And finally, were there any Batman figures or Batman characters planned for the line, specifically from the Bat family? And were there any plans for neon repaints or neon Batmobiles or crazy neon colors of the 90s?
Not for this segment. This one went pretty straightforward. It was an opportunity to kind of do a small, affordable segment, introduce some other characters, and keep it going between movies in a way, and that it served its purpose. And for me, it was a good learning about how to do segmentation early on in my career.
And they also, for Thomas, who's asking here, the Diamond exclusive box set 2-packs actually did take that Batman and give it hologram colors, if you will. So you kind of got it. Yeah. They made a lot of use of that Batman mold afterwards.
Well, they did the whole. Didn't they do the White Martian thing?
They did. I'm trying to
with
look through
with some of those hologram Batmans with the different logos and stuff.
Yeah, they did Martian Manhunter, and then they did the hologram Superman, hologram Batman, hologram Flash, hologram Green Lantern, hologram Aquaman, and then hologram Martian Manhunter. Yeah. The first Impulse figure also was in that. The Diamond exclusive ones is an interesting lineup of figures.
Yeah, they got to do. So what I think happened was I turned over all my files probably to them, and so there might be a combination of characters we pulled reference for that we just never got to, or I mean, we pitched who we made. There's not it wasn't like I tried to get Impulse in and we just didn't, but he was definitely there being discussed. Should we do that kind of new character? Again,
someone that was ridiculously fresh at the time.
Oh yeah.
Impulse, I think, was 93. I want to say, and again in that timeline, he would have barely been new in the comics. But again, that's probably the biggest takeaway from Total Justice is that of this entire stack of figures, how many of them literally are the rookie cards for these characters. They're just if you're a Wally West fan, it starts here. If you're a Tim Drake fan, a Kyle fan, if you like Huntress, or if you're a big fan of the Parallax version of Hal Jordan, it starts here. If you love the Flash series and you want to have that first Reverse Flash action figure, it's that Toy Fair exclusive. So it's very interesting how a lot of the modern era of superhero characters, their very first plastic incarnations started with this line. So cool stuff. Very, very cool stuff.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I mean, talk about embarrassment of riches. This is my first segment as a toy designer under my own kind of, decision making, and I got to work with the big five, so to speak. Pretty wild to think back now. I was 23. maybe 23, maybe just turning 23.
For this line, what did you learn and or take away from this? The armor creation, the picking of characters from a bigger company, kind of trying to make sure that there's a proper representation of their IP. What did you take away from this more than anything?
I think it was a checklist that you just ran off that showed me, you'll hear me at different times talk about the job's not just to draw pretty pictures. And having this opportunity this early in my career to be responsible for a lot of the types of decisions that managers make, directors make, vice presidents make.
For the number one selling boys toy line at the time
was big and beneficial. Total Justice wasn't, but the brand family
of Batman,
so absolutely, yeah. I mean, Power Rangers was the big toy line at the time, but for Kenner Hasbro, Batman was it. Yes. Yeah. So learning to pay attention to, what licensings, what's happening in the market, leveraging a variety of characters and, making sure you have the variety of colors and all that stuff, defining a new style that can stand apart from the other toy lines on the shelf. Learning all that kind of stuff was critical. And then through that, all the conversation with a licensor, DC, about, these characters and which ones to use and all that, taught me how licensors approach their business. and why they make the decisions they make. And, that would pay obvious dividends down the long run of my career.
Now, do you remember after you were finished this, what was then the next thing you were going to go on to?
Well, everything was in staggered waves. So we would have been working, I would have also been, probably when I was developing the early boards for Total Justice, I was also checking off the paint master of my laser Batman. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And probably doing Pirate Batman sculpt inputs at the same time.
You're kind of also leaning into like Batman and Robin stuff a little bit.
Yeah. Probably we were probably gearing up for a pitch of what could we be doing. So at any given day, I'm kind of in a mix of things. So I was in charge of Total Justice, which meant I had to go to the meetings of schedule and help define the different things for the different departments. Whereas on Batman Forever product, I might have just been an executor of a couple items. And that was handled by someone else who was the responsible designer for that segment. So my time was focused on my big brands and then helping the other segments. And that's just how it flowed, because you can't do a whole wave at once. You can only push so much through a pipe at a single time. So you need to balance it all out and hopefully stagger stuff. So some days I do a board in the beginning of the day, do a sculpt input halfway through the day, check off a final deco, and then make comments to Hong Kong on a developed model, all in the same day. Different models, but you're developing at any development stage every day.
Would you say that this line specifically, it kind of parallels in a lot of ways what you would go on to do when you were given the helm for Transformers Armada?
It's the beginning of that. I think after we go through the creation of Night Force Ninjas,
okay,
that'll be the one that, this is how you pitch a line, this is how you make the decisions, this is where you find input, and how you sell it, make sure everybody understands what the intent is. So Night Force Ninjas started that, but then that's how our
which we'll cover in a future segment for sure.
Yeah,
definitely. But yeah, so this is it. This is Total Justice. I think we've pretty much covered everything that is Total Justice in a lot of ways. I don't think there's anything
I don't think so.
Man, we really squeezed every drop out of that orange. But yeah, so if you were a fan of Total Justice and you had any questions in relation to specifically the Total Justice Batman line, just submit it to us and we'll read it in a future segment on the podcast itself. Otherwise, that's it more or less. So, Aaron, thank you again for coming and talking about the Batman Total Justice line.
Awesome as always.
Yeah, and I am the Protoman, also known as Daniel, and this is the Toy Armada with Aaron Archer. I hope you have a good time, and we'll talk to you again in the near future.